This episode of our This Week in XR podcast is sponsored by Zappar. Zappar is one of the world's leading XR companies. Over the past 12 years, they've won numerous awards for memorable campaigns. They've democratized AR by making tools and SDKs that anyone can use. And they created ZapBox, the world's most affordable mixed reality headset. Most recently, Zappar worked with Unilever to create an enhanced QR code called Accessible QR, which enables packaged goods to speak to the blind and partially sighted. If you're thinking XR, give the team at Zappar a call or visit zappar.com to see how they can help you on your XR journey. Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Fink with Ted Schilowitz and Roni Abovitz for the AI XR podcast. Today is Friday, January 31st. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Morning, guys.
We have a great guest this morning, Sean Carey, who is the founder and CEO of Helium Wireless, which is a decentralized wireless service that is provided mostly by individuals. And they have a tokenized system for compensating individuals for hosting that hotspot. So I'm really interested to hear how his business is going. It's a great business model, or an exciting new one. So we'll learn something about that. Meanwhile, it has been kind of a crazy week in tech, a lot going on. In particular, the launch of DeepSeek last Friday has caused some major waves.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I'm a big Jon Stewart fan. I presume you guys are, and considering he's back on the air and has been for a little
Hi, John,
while.
if you're a listener. Probably not, but
Yeah.
you never know.
And now with all the hubbub around, what politics apparently is now, which is just insanity and incompetence at a spectacular level. He's got a lot of fodder, but he had the best comment about the AI stuff. So watch his episode from last Monday. I'll paraphrase as best I can. I won't get it exactly right, but he basically was, of course, making the obvious fun of, wait a minute, a cheap Chinese AI ripoff. How could that be a thing, right?
Which allegedly, now we learn, was illegally trained on OpenAI.
Yes. And then the most enjoyable comment was, okay, so now a Chinese ripoff is stealing AI from AI.
Right.
Who is stealing it from who?
Yeah, exactly.
It has caused some major ripples. NVIDIA, which was running a little too hot for its own good from a stock market perception, took a $600 billion hit, which was the largest one-day plunge of any stock in all time. Now, again, this takes them back to their September price. So I would say that NVIDIA stock owners should not be pounding sand too hard, because they've had
it bounced back a little bit
run.
The next day and stuff.
Yeah, it came back a little bit. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But here's the implication for those who aren't super AI savvy. One, there's an implication that fairly low cost CPUs, not necessarily made by NVIDIA, CPU GPUs, like people are talking about like arrays of Sony PlayStations strung together. The new Apple M2 chip, things that are just much less expensive and much more available than kind of those really high-end NVIDIAs. Also, within 4 or 5 days of a $500 billion data set announcement by Masa Son, Sam Altman, Larry Ellison, and the president, all of a sudden, like, all of that's called into question. Do you need that giant data center? So it sort of says this is what I am excited about. Small teams with low-cost computing can compete, and it's not going to be the domain of the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah,
that's the message for everybody.
Yeah, I think that suggestion that you can take these large models and slim them down without harming their utility or even improving them, is kind of incredible. I was playing with it. I don't know if you guys have had a chance. It's the largest, most downloaded app in the App Store right now. And it is massively fast. It is better than the first OpenAI, which was not connected to the web, which is critical. And its reasoning capabilities, I thought, were not that remarkable. So from the quality standpoint, I mean, I talked to somebody from who works on Grok, and he said that it was really good with technical things, really good. So even though, I'm doing, more humanities stuff, the people doing science with it were really excited. And I did not realize that for some of that coding stuff, OpenAI actually is pretty slow at times.
But Charlie, here's the flip side. We're making all this hullabaloo about banning TikTok and all this stuff. Meanwhile, China now shoves in a big, whole new platform into this country that's getting downloaded everywhere. Let me ask you a question. Has anyone run a cybersecurity scan on what that thing is? Do we know what's inside
I
it?
always think about that
Do we know what
laugh.
it's saying? It's crazy, right? It's like we're locking one door. Meanwhile, the barn door has all the foxes coming in, and the biggest companies in the world, like Amazon and Apple, are like, come download this thing. So there's kind of like no logic in how we're dealing with like, is China a problem or not? Because if
Yeah,
it
and
is,
then
why are you allowing one of their most successful AI brains to percolate all over the United States in like just a matter of days? It's kind of insane. If there really is a concern, who's watching the Watchmen? Like what's going on there?
yeah, well, and if we put our conspiracy theory hats on in terms of the timing being somewhat suspect of TikTok theoretically goes away, then administration comes in, TikTok doesn't go away, and then they drop this, right? So were they waiting and preparing and holding at bay until the right moment that they knew they wouldn't have any oversight or restriction to plunk this right into our universe?
Hmm.
Good question, Charlie.
So,
Ted.
before we get to Sean, let me hit a couple of our other stories real fast because we could go on the DeepMind. Uh,
DeepSeek, yeah.
The DeepMind well is deep. Okay, SoftBank. Mayoshi Son is back. Speaking of the $500 billion joint venture deal announced last week, they are going to lead a $500 million round for Skilled AI, a Pittsburgh-based robotics startup with a $4 billion valuation. This follows a $300 million round in July, led by Lightspeed. So I think we talked about that at the time, but robots is a coming.
Well, they've already come. I mean, there are robots in warehouses all across the world, and more to come. I sometimes listen to an MIT podcast that has a lot of insights around these types of things, and there's an interesting perspective on should AI and robotics be building things that humans primarily do, or should they focus on things that humans have difficulty or impossibility to do, right? And so far, both AI and robotics are essentially taking a mirrored course on trying to act and be like humans. So, Roni, this might be an interesting, touch point for you from a perspective standpoint of is the danger of people's focus that we're trying to emulate the human activity and experience as opposed to expand on it and allow humans to work with robotics in a way that increases capabilities, increases productivity. It was a really interesting perspective on it.
So
That's a
that's a question very close to my heart because I spent a long time building and still work in collaborative robotics,
Yeah.
collaborative AI. So first of all, the rejection, sort of the antibodies around a humanoid coming in to take human jobs is very high. And also, why are you targeting where the largest class of workers exists? And like the sort of low paid blue collar worker to lift boxes and do basic things. That's what a lot of these humanoids are doing. But I think we're going to have a DeepSeek moment here. There's way too many humanoid companies that have raised billions of dollars that are all building general purpose, kind of AI brains, and someone's going to come in at 100 or 1,000x price reduction
Hmm.
on the brain. That'll be better. And what'll happen to all these companies? And then you'll see in China, there's going to be a robot that's like a 10th or 20th of the price. So you're already seeing that, like
Hmm.
big dog competitors. And you could almost get a humanoid from China for like 15K, a big dog for, 3,500. So there's a huge price disparity. And I think it's going to be like consumer electronics, where can we in the US make and create things at the price point that will be demanded by the world? And also, what are you going to use them for? Right. Also ask the question, China, 1.5 billion people, what are you going to do with the humanoid? I only see a couple areas actually. It's like defense, where you don't want people killed,
Yeah.
and potentially in healthcare, like elder care, So basically imagine like being elderly and now you don't have the embarrassment of needing a personal assistant or a nurse aide. You have your like, robot and Frank, your own personal. I think that one's very interesting, to help someone through, a disabled person through.
Yeah,
But that's not what these people are going for. They're going for like, everyone's got like the Amazon box lifter because
correct.
it's about the only thing they could do right now. And how many Amazon box lifting robots do we need?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at things like fire, prevention and police activities and things and war activities where you're putting machines into environments that you don't want to put humans into. But you're right, the corporate side of this is removing the human element from things that humans will and can do, right? So it's an
Well,
interesting.
here's something that's an interesting and topical question because we just had an air collision, which took, says 69 or 68 lives over the Potomac in Washington, D.C. If those machines, if those the plane and the helicopter's machines were controlling them, there would have been no collision.
Let me argue about that, Charlie. I think medtech and aviation operates somewhere between 6 sigma and 9 sigma levels of perfection, like 1 in 10 million, 1 in 100 million, 1 in a billion. But think about how many planes have taken off and landed around this country without an incident. You're in the massive number. You're in the statistical probability of like tens of millions. So let's say
you're
there was
saying the economics for that of doing that is not really that good.
Well, if you made it all machine, is there a chance, just like with a person, something goes slightly, because it wasn't like we're having a failure every other day. You're having like 1 in 100 million
Right.
kind of incidents.
Good
I mean,
point.
aviation is actually so safe relative to automotive, and this was a horrible accident, but look at the total volume of aircraft over the last 30 years, total incidents in North America. Can you actually do better with a compute system? Maybe, but you won't know until you've got like decades and hundreds of millions of flights. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Well, keep in mind that you also have, the aviation industry is largely computerized and it uses massive amounts of systems and sensors and, workflows
They can't run it at this point without their computer system.
Absolutely. Most airlines, their typical flight is almost all automated, except for, periods of time when it's not. So, it's that blending of machine and man. Aviation is a really strong proof point of that. Right, blending works phenomenally well until it doesn't.
But here's a question: if the government DOGE is going to cut more people and more budget, are you going to now cognitively overload and overwork even more people like that? Like, I mean, instead of having enough manpower, it looks like these people were, and I think air traffic controllers around the country would agree, they're overworked.
Yeah.
They're usually understaffed, doing too much. And your attention span and cognitive loading is probably peaked to over peaked at times. And you can only do that for so long. So is the answer cut more jobs out and cut more budget? Not just to them, but to everybody. This is kind of like when you really think about, hey, just go cut everything out of the government budget, make it more efficient. Are you also cutting on training? Are you also cutting on recruiting, paying less salary so you get lower quality people? Like, this is a real thing to consider because you got someone with a chainsaw just slashing budgets.
But this is
very real.
The model of Twitter and the federal government are not the same. Private industry is here to make money. The government is here to spend money on our behalf.
Safely.
And so the notion that somebody who's a businessman instead of a public servant is going to be better at managing the system has been plaguing us since Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. And this pendulum swings back and forth. It swings
this
all
is
the way
a really,
in one direction and then swings back
really
again.
big swing in one direction. And that means that the counter spring, if you will be equally powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So that should cause the people who are left leaning some minor comfort as we watch this unfold in real time, which in many ways is hard to take. I am very concerned about the quarterback situation here in Los Angeles. And I have taken to scrolling the sporting news instead of doom scrolling the Washington Post and other sources of information just to give myself heartburn. And I will say this, my wife doesn't listen to the podcast, so I can say this. I am going to take her phone away because she is driving herself crazy. It's like, look, you're not a lawyer. You don't live in Washington, D.C. You're one little person. This is happening. You know, all we can do is vote and hope that the votes are properly counted. But we are, no matter how rich you are, whether you have 20 million or $20,000, that is all the power you have right now.
Well,
So
Charlie, I had one empowering thing for our listeners, though. I'm going to swing this back to our XR, the AI XR.
please,
Given the conservative push happening in DC, right? And a lot of folks who, I don't know, have interesting lives might be somewhat frightened. I think the metaverse and avatars and digital identity are going to become a safe haven for all kind of groups who don't feel safe out in public in the physical world. So the more constricted the physical world becomes and the harder it is to like be who you are, I think the more metaverses and communities where you can like take an avatar identity, create like your community online around the world in a safe place, I think that's going to actually explode. So in a weird way, the metaverse could go through a renaissance. Avatars can go through a renaissance. That's going to pull AI with it as well. But think about it. Like if you can't openly be who you want to be, it's really interesting because that's what like Second Life and all these like early VR communities were full of people trying to be whatever. So it's interesting. I think this digital identity is going to be a big deal that we should watch.
Well, and today's version of that there are Reddit communities across the entire spectrum that are now banning hate speech in their own realm and saying, in this realm, like a lot of people would take X posts and just cut and paste them, copy them, right, and add them in. And there are certain Reddit communities, I was reading an article about this, that disallow that now, that say, this is not the place for this kind of rhetoric. We want to have our community be represented in the way that we want to be represented. You can go someplace else. It's like it's the ultimate, if you don't like it, turn it off, right? You don't need to be here if you're going to spew hate. We want you to be here if you're going to be representative of this community and respectful of this community. It was really interesting. So there's a precursor to the full metaverse version of this that's happening right now.
It's just that we live in a highly tribalized, segmented world, and that would be another big segment, and we're not being exposed to each other and each other's ideas.
Yeah,
Of
become
course,
more isolated.
when those ideas are crazy, where do you go from there? But it's all about the fact that the internet, social media, and now amped up with AI is something with which democracy is really compatible. And so, with that genie out of the bottle, it's really a hard question to solve. Do you run away? Do you choose your tribe? Is there a way to talk to anybody and be heard? I don't know. Those are tough questions. So Sean isn't here yet. So there's some other good news stories to get at. Two more big funding news. 11 Labs.
Yeah, huge.
11 Labs is getting 250 million. And they continue to dominate this sort of voice cloning, AI-driven voice area, which is going to be so critical in a world filled with agents.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of yin and yang for me on that one because that level of funding is kind of interesting for that. But it seems like such a hyper competitive area that so many will attack this area of the live call agent and the voiceover replacement and anything to do with voice. Certainly, they're representing a leadership stance and getting capital and capitalized because of it. It just feels like everyone, will enter that realm with their own version of what language model can do that. So I don't know.
Well, right, they've got character AI over at Google.
Yeah,
so that's a good point. Most of their competitors are behind them, I will say. So we'll see what happens. But yes, huge category and growing. Let's see. Oh, here's one. Marcus Brownlee, our friend Marcus Brownlee, the YouTuber who somehow gets his hands on equipment before anybody else does, did a 30 minutes hands-on with the Samsung, Google, Qualcomm headset.
Yeah, I watched it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was pretty impressed with it and felt that in many ways it exceeded the Vision Pro. My question is, in a world where the Vision Pro has suspended production and Apple's kind of looking 2 years away to what they can do and probably slimming down to audio smart glasses with maybe some tiny display is what Meta appears to be headed toward. Um, so we have an environment where Quest 3, although I understand they just announced in their earnings call that they had a good Q4, although their expenses are still crazy high $12 billion a year, and they're never going to make that kind of money, not for decades, I don't think. But of course, Meta is making so much money right now, and they're going to make more because the eyeballs are moving to social away from legacy media, which I would consider at this point to be regular cable television and streaming, because everybody is watching, is consuming this content on the go, or at least on a small screen, sitting there at home. And the amount of time spent on those platforms compared to traditional television, the only place traditional television is still winning is sports.
Sports, yeah, live sports, yeah.
So anyway, I'm excited to get my hands on the Samsung. I think it's going to be shy of content at first, like they all are. But $1,000 device that is that powerful is going to get a lot of people excited right off the bat. What there is to do with it, Marcus thought for productivity, this was actually doable, that you could spend several hours in this thing working in a multi-screen environment, which of course is at least one of the apps that everybody thinks will make these devices more commonplace.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the question. I'm going to refer to our dear Tim at South by. Just because it costs $1,000 and not 2,800, is it going to be something you actually want to wear for a couple hours? Is it that much lighter? Is the screen better? Are the headaches less likely? I mean, those are all questions we've got to answer when you try it.
Well, and what's interesting from my perspective is this is another one of those Steve Jobs would be rolling over in his grave, because as you see little clips of what the interface looks like and the experience looks like, it is very much just another turn of that page of Apple does it first, does it well, and Android just figures out a way to cobble together their sort of lesser version of it, right? And now with the technology at the parity that it's at, it isn't really a lesser version, it's just a different version. But when I saw the home screen experience in the Samsung headset, and you see the way they lay out the icons and the way you use your hands to touch it, it is just like remember when Steve went crazy and started to sue Android for look, you're literally taking our entire UI, you're taking our entire experience and just doing your cheaper version of it. And this is just another chapter in that another page in that chapter. When you see what it looks like, there's no real, unique innovation that I can see. It's just, okay, we see what Apple does. That works pretty well. Now let's just build our version of that. And even the design and look of the device looks like a ripoff of the Apple device, albeit probably a little lighter, kind of thing, and a little better balance. So there's some things that are better because you can learn from that competitive environment, but ultimately, it's just another there's Apple and then there's Android.
I mean, Ted, there's a serves them right kind of feeling, which is I had that experience watching the Vision Pro get unveiled, because I'm like, oh, all of that seems incredibly familiar from 5 or 6 years earlier. And by the way, interesting, many of the exact same people working on that UI. So it is kind of funny. It's like OpenAI screaming about DeepSeek stealing from them, where it's like unclear where the heck did OpenAI's data come from. Yeah. It's like a den of thieves, this tech world right now we live in.
Yeah, that's a very good app description. Den of thieves is a very good.
Speaking of a den of thieves, we're changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico, but only on American devices.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, the Gulf of America. Google said
the
they'll
Gulf
call
of
it the
America,
Gulf of
right?
America
But
now.
Google if you are using your phone in Mexico, it will say the Gulf of Mexico. But if you're using your phone in the United States, it's going to say Gulf of the Americas. I have no idea what happens to Canada, but obviously Google has to comply with the laws of the country in which it's operating. So the US says the president says it's the Gulf of America. The president gets the Gulf of America. But the Mexican president said, we're going to pass a law and you guys will have to keep it. And Google's like, no, we're only changing it on US.
Actually, if the Mexican president was cheeky, he could draw a big thing around California, New Mexico, Texas, and say, the former Mexican Republic.
Right.
I mean, it can get
Exactly.
really weird where people stop agreeing on things, like borders and names. That's a bit insane.
Yeah, I mean, if
It's not
if
good.
the new prime minister of Canada says, "Well, Detroit is now part of Canada," kind of thing, just decides to do
Yeah,
that.
I mean, this is almost silly at this point, but it certainly did insult Mexico. So Meta just settled their lawsuit over January 6th that Trump had brought against them that they certainly would have won. Uh, but it's part of this larger corporatism, and the administration is open for business, and America's largest corporations lined up. And I don't know. Zuck had a all hands yesterday, which was widely reported. And he, of course, but there were reporters invited, um, in including Alex Heath, one of the editors at The Verge, who has been on the show and is a friend. And they let them listen in because he said he started by saying this whole thing is going to be leaked anyway,
Mhm.
which I hate, but it's obviously reality. So, they invited Alex and a few other journalists, and Zuck gave a very strongly worded, I thought, defense of their new policies, insisted they had nothing to do with politics or administration, just with how he wants to run the company. And I think we're getting toward this libertarianism run amok, because corporations do not get to decide. American corporations cannot be run solely for profit. They have a responsibility to their employees. They have a responsibility to society. That's especially true in Meta's case. And, you go back to our discussions, if you remember, when the George Floyd thing was happening, and we were saying, diversity and inclusion. Um, Tech companies talk a big game, and Zuck and others were speaking out about it at the time. And that was right, but it takes a long time. And, before that thing could even really build momentum, I just think that this idea that shareholder value is the only metric by which we measure American companies is fundamentally wrong. I don't think the only thing a company does and a CEO does is maximize profit.
So Charlie, here's the big question. You have an interesting set of bedfellows like fascists, autocrats, dictators, kings, libertarians, and tech CEOs, all realizing it's a free-for-all economy, as long as they pay fealty to the kings. And the king president is saying we're going to roll back pre-FDR. They actually said this, I think, in the last week. The whole Great Society, the Greatest Generation. Let's erase the last almost 100 years. It wasn't quite 100 years, and go to the time before that. So no one's around anymore in
You
America that
mean the
understands what that meant.
1890s? The
Yes,
1890s, when there were robber barons,
the
the
Gilded Age.
exactly.
That's if anyone wants to understand what's going on, the Gilded Age were robber barons, and that was it. Like you'd have somewhere between slaves, servants, and serfs building railroads. The robber barons were basically feudal lords, and that's how the country was expanding. Like expand west, go take things, go do things. It was I that Gilded Age idea, I think, is what they're all rallying around, with some other nuances like AI and never give up power and other stuff like that.
The problem is there are so many third rails there now, like Medicare, and look, their entire party is made up of old white people. Honestly, they're all white people. I mean, yeah, they peeled off, a million. They have strong support from obviously the, Hispanic Latino communities. Um, and I mean, they voted for a thing that's going to make them suffer the most. I mean, as I said, the irony here is that people are turning to their tormentors for relief.
But what happens, Charlie, when Medicare's cut and all these aids and social welfare things
The
can't do social welfare
pendulum,
are
pendulum
cut?
will swing back. That's
Well, maybe, but they'll basically blame DEI. They'll blame people from not in this country taking your job away, and a lot of good-meaning folks who've been hoodwinked will be stuck wondering what just happened. That's going to be a moment of reckoning when the robber barons have robbed enough and the den of thieves have taken what they're going to take. I'm just thinking about people in Arkansas and Texas and Oklahoma, good meaning people who think make the country great means something different than what's actually going on.
Yeah.
Actual patriotic people that do believe in the country are not quite clued in to what the robber barons are doing. This is not a dirt farmer, Levon Helm getting the dirt in an Arkansas dirt farm thing. This is like robber barons, like opening up the doors and just collecting it all. Like they somehow mistook carpetbaggers for people who are salt of the earth farmers from Nebraska. None of these folks are that. But it's like one of the greatest hoodwinks ever put on. And by the way, and then you wrap AI and other complex technologies around it that like uneducated folks will have no idea what's happening.
I don't know. I have this vague sense, and maybe it's my own mental illness, that my work in tech has actually helped this situation come about. And it's just a sum of my own greed and hypocrisy. And, here we are, we are promoting these technologies. We're plenty critical of them, but we are promoting them. And the people listening to us are promoting them. And, you can't, for example, you can't not participate in the economy because you think companies are making too much money.
No, Charlie, the problem is not tech. The problem is like, how are you thinking about the outside of your own company? Are you creating a zero-sum game, or are you creating an equilibrium and giving back? By the way, a lot of these companies that were giving back, that were trying to create an equilibrium, they're just like shifting and saying, we're not doing that anymore, which means, was it ever a core value, or was it just performative like a lot of people suspected?
It was performative, obviously. Anyway, let's move on to something that was good news this week. The Copyright Office issued some new guidance on what can be copyrighted or not. And they are excluding things that are made primarily with the computer. But if you write a script, you're using human voices, you're editing things by hand, and can show human control over the technology, then you're in the clear. And I think for most artists working in AI today, that's the way it works. There are certainly some applications of AI and companies working very hard to automate making short content. So surely there will be a lot of junk content out there that is synthetic and should not be protected by copyright. But when a legitimate artist is making content with AI, let's say the Coca-Cola AI commercial that was airing over Christmas, that is totally copyrightable. Of course, not apples to apples, because Coca-Cola obviously owns its mark, and it's anything made associated with it certainly is deeply protected. But
if AI is part of the team, you can get a copyright. But
yes.
If it's solely AI, you can't. Is that kind of a simple way to think of it?
Yes, and there are also elements, let's say character design, which are still a gray area. If all your characters are designed by Midjourney, can your film be protected? So there are some gray areas, and they gave no guidance on that. So a lot of this is going to be subject to ongoing interpretation. But I think this was a very, very favorable ruling overall to people who are creating content with AI, but it does impose on them the obligation to keep track of what was inside of your project, what was touched by humans when.
Yeah.
Because
It'll be interesting.
You'll be asked to prove, as nobody is today, was that shot made by a machine or a human?
It'll be interesting to see when we get our first wave of true hit content that is partially or wholly generated in various forms of AI. And the monetization train starts to roll, and then the claims of who owns what and who can derive those dollars will be really fascinating to watch. Right now, there's really not enough on, it's just the tech companies and the providers of the technology that are pulling in all the dollars, but the creators themselves very little. But when that changes, that's when another rash of these legal sort of arguments and discussions will start to take place. It'll be actually really interesting to see, when case law starts to come out against, well, that's our profit, and the tech providers like, well, no, actually, that's our profit, kind of thing. Be very interesting to see.
Totally. So Sean clearly has somehow missed our engagement, although he confirmed on Monday, as I ask all of our guests to do. So Sean, we missed you, and I hope we get you back. Sean's a great get. And so we look forward to rescheduling him. Meanwhile, next week we have Sean Mann from RP1, which is a metaverse browser, I guess you could say, that allows you to enter multiplayer environments just from your browser anywhere that is so enabled. So
Yeah, they've been working on
really
this for a while. We've met
technology,
them
yeah.
at multiple CESs. They've been working on it for a while.
And what's really interesting, of course, is there's no limit to it. This is the limitless metaverse that everybody is talking about. All we have to do is adapt this browser. So we'll talk about that next week. It's a really interesting concept. The concept of the metaverse, as Roni brought up earlier, has not gone away. It is still alive and well on Roblox and Fortnite Creative and Second Life and other places. So the question is, when are they going to be able to be connected? And a browser, since they are all now browser based, is a really, really good way for that to happen. So I'm excited. I really like him, and he'll be a great guest too. So I think that's all the show we have today. It's a shorty.
There's a lot of covered, though. We covered a lot of stuff today. That's right.
There's a lot going on in the world, and it is hard at times to know how to feel about it. So with that said, guys, always great to hang out with you on Friday morning. Have a great weekend and a great week, everybody, and we'll see you back here next Friday.